In this video, I'll be removing the manifold plate, the reeds, inspecting everything, putting it back together with a fresh gasket. I'll also replace any parts if I find that they need replacing. Here you'll see me removing the throttle linkage as well as the shift links, and then removing the bolts holding the manifold plate onto the engine. The service manual calls for thorough cleaning, but it does say not to use harsh chemicals. So I'm ruling out the option of a dip tank and some of the harsher carburetor cleaners. They probably would be fine, but I'd rather not take the chance. So I'm going to use foaming engine cleaner. And once I'm done with that, I'll lightly scrub it and rinse it off with hot water. Now that the manifold and reeds have been rinsed off and cleaned, I'm going to dry them off with compressed air, keeping it at 25 psi so as not to cause any damage. Now that the manifold and reeds are dry, I'll be removing the reed plates. There are two screws that hold the reed plates on the back. They're not very tight. They're easy to remove. The reed plates should pop right off. After I've got the reed plates off, what I'll do is remove the gasket using a paint tool that has a sharp edge, being careful not to gouge the manifold. Inspecting the leaves, as they call them, or more commonly known as the reeds, you're looking for cracks or little indentations or openings, and these look pretty clean actually. Take a look at the other ones. Again, these actually look pretty clean. Next, I'll be inspecting the manifold's gasket surface for flatness. The service manual calls for a variation of plus or minus 3/1000ths of an inch. I'm using machinist parallel bars, which are accurate to 1/1000th of an inch. Now that I've got the surfaces cleaned off and ready to go, we're going to install the fresh gasket. Service manual does call for a dry installation, and what I'm doing here is just getting the screws started. Let's make this easier by holding the gasket in place, and will let me get the screws lined up with the leaf plates. Now that I have the leaf plates installed onto the manifold and a new gasket, it's ready to go into the engine. It'll only go into the engine in one direction, so that makes it a little easier. I'll install the bolts and finger tighten them, and we'll torque them down to spec in a few minutes. Now that I've got the manifold and reeds installed and the bolts loosely tightened, I will now torque these. The service manual calls for 60 to 84 inch-pounds of torque. So I'll go around in a semicircle, kind of a figure eight, torquing these bolts in. Next, I'll put the carburetors on. After putting in fresh gaskets, I'll install each carb individually. The easiest way to get these carbs on is to hold the nut between your thumb and forefinger on each hand, place it in front of the carburetor, and slide the whole thing into the assembly where the bolts are sticking out of the manifold. You can thread the bolts on manually till it's heated enough that you can get a wrench in, and after that you can tighten it fairly easily. And of course, don't forget to put the fuel and primer hose onto the carb and zip tie them. Now that we're done, it's time to start this engine.